I will now call to order a special meeting of Council, the Town of St. Andrews, a public hearing / reading of objections concerning the secondary municipal plan bylaw MP 20-02. Recording of attendance, I note that all members of council are in attendance with the exception of Councillor Bishop, who is unable to be with us this evening. I'll look first to an approval of the agenda. Motion to approve the agenda, please.
I so move.
Thank you, Councillor Groove. And a seconder, please.
I'll move.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor Henderson. All in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. We will now go to a presentation of the secondary municipal plan bylaw MP 20-2 by Alexander Gopin, planner for the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission. Alexander?
Thank you, Your Worship. And thank you, members of council, and to the members of the public who are tuning in. I'm just going to share my screen and go to the presentation. I'm going to try and keep it brief. I know council has seen this presentation before. I think some members of the public probably have too. And I know there's another public hearing tonight that some people might wish to get to at 6:30. So I'll do my best to keep it brief, but I'll definitely stick around for questions after. So we're talking about the secondary municipal plan tonight. And if you've had a chance to look at it, you'll know that the actual policies in it, there's 2 or 3, and they take up less than a page. And really the bulk of the secondary plan is an appendix or a schedule called a design manual. Basically, secondary plans exist to regulate specific geographic areas that might not be sufficiently covered in the general municipal plan or in the zoning bylaw. And this is what's being proposed for the town plat and the historic business district. And you'll see a map in a second of what areas are actually covered in this. But first, briefly, why a design manual? Why is this seen as a good step? Well, the architectural heritage and quality of design in St. Andrews are not just aesthetic parts of history that tell the story of the town. They're also economic drivers, because people want to come to the town, learn about that story, learn about it through the built heritage. And certainly the aesthetics of St. Andrews are one of the reasons why people love coming to town. And it's definitely seen in the pride and care that residents take in the upkeep of their homes. And I think that extends into a collective pride in the town and the businesses and the work that the town itself does to beautify the physical environment. And this recognition goes beyond the town itself, all the way to the federal government of Canada. In 1995, Parks Canada designated the town plat a National Historic District. And that isn't just because of the buildings in it, it's actually because of that street layout. The plat itself is one of the last remaining examples of that style of British planning, town planning with a grid that you can see in Atlantic Canada. So it's not just the buildings, the materials the buildings are made of, but it's actually the streetscape itself, the street layout. And planners have recognized this as well. In 2016, Water Street won the Canadian Institute of Planners Great Street Award. And one thing I'll be mentioning kind of throughout this presentation is that in the current zoning bylaw, which will likely be replaced sometime later in this year, stay tuned for an upcoming public hearing on that. It is regulated in Section 9 of the current zoning bylaw. So if you're a homeowner or business owner in one of these areas and you've done some development, you'll know that you have additional requirements that come through Section 9 of the zoning bylaw. And we in crafting this document, now some of this came through public consultation, but also there's a lot of sensitivity to the taking care not to place additional onerous requirements on residents and business owners. So it's a new package. It's a new way of thinking about heritage and design in St. Andrews, but the actual requirements themselves are very much the same as what is in Section 9 of the zoning bylaw now. And you can actually go on the town's website. You can see the design manual there, the secondary plan. There's also a chart comparing the design manual's requirements to Section 9 of the zoning bylaw. So you can actually see how those talk to each other. Now here's the map of the areas that would be covered. The red is the historic business district, which hasn't changed at all from what that has been in the past years. The blue, the town plat, you can see the historic town plat. It's a little hard to see, but it's this black outline here. There are some areas that go beyond the historic town plat and are adjacent on the other side of the street. And the reason for that is when you drive into town, oftentimes people do kind of the loop around town. So they're obviously driving through the plat, looking into the plat, but they're also going to be driving and seeing the other side of the street, or walking or biking, however they're getting around. So that's, you know, when you think about the historical nature of the town, those areas should be thought of as well. And one thing you learn very quickly when you work in heritage is that there's no one era of heritage. And yes, you have buildings in St. Andrews that go back to 1786 that are wonderful examples of vernacular architecture at that time. But you also have in the earlier 1900s, the Maxwell brothers from Montreal, very well-known architects. They designed some of the buildings up on Adolphus near Kingsbury Gardens. So they're really important examples of architecture as well. And one thing to note is that there is, in this document, there's an understanding that residents, because they're not, their home isn't a part of their business, so to speak, whereas business owners, the way it looks is obviously that's part of your business. So you might be more inclined to spend more, have higher standards for your business. So that is kind of incorporated in this guide as well. But that again is mirrored from Section 9 of the zoning bylaw. There were and are stricter requirements for the historic business district in that document. So what the manual does and how it does it is through a hybrid regulatory and educational document that has requirements in it, which are mostly in the historic business district, and it also has best practices. So the idea is to not just focus on requirements like a zoning bylaw or even a municipal plan, and really any bylaw that most people see. Yes, it does do that, but it also has educational component, which explains how different elements contribute to quality design. And it's much more user-friendly and visual than most bylaws. It also is not a heritage conservation bylaw. Those of you who know the history around that in town know that that was a controversial proposal that didn't get passed through council. I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago now that happened. And this is a very different document. It's not, it doesn't deal with specific buildings the way that the Heritage Conservation Bylaw did. There were specific properties named as historic places. This document does not do that. It's really about how does the design of a new development or a major renovation fit into the context. And in that sense, this isn't even really a heritage document. If the area you're in is made up of buildings from the late 1700s and early 1800s, then fitting into that context, yes, you do have to take that into account. But in other parts of town, as I was speaking about with the Maxwell buildings, it's a different context. So it's when you talk to designers, they speak again and again about context and how important it is to fit into a context. So that's not something that a heritage conservation bylaw does. That's really about specific elements in a building, in a district, and how they need to be preserved. And part of that preservation is regulating demolition. This document does not touch demolition at all. And I mentioned the specific properties. Here's a sample page just to show you kind of the educational visual nature of it. This page does not deal with requirements at all. It's explaining how you have a pattern of fenestration or windows. The pattern of windows has a rhythm to it. How there are these kind of lines that they're not there, but subconsciously when we look at a building, we do take this into consideration and we find the symmetry pleasing. So the document tries to explain a little bit about why we find good design to be aesthetically pleasing. For the things that are required, kind of like in the zoning bylaw, a development officer would check to make sure that it's meeting the requirements. The zoning bylaw still applies. So in the cases where this document has more stringent regulations than the zoning bylaw, it would supersede because it is a municipal plan, and that is higher in the hierarchy of planning documents than the zoning bylaw. For things that are best practices, they are education, they're information. The development officer can certainly work with developers to encourage those best practices, but they're not requirements. There are cases where maybe through a development agreement, through a condition or term on a variance, some of those could be lifted in and used as requirements, but just as the document stands, they're not. And here's a sample page that includes both best practices and a requirement. So the best practices use language like should, may, language like that. And under the bold where it says required, which hopefully makes it clear that this is the required section, it's in the language of a proposal. And that's on purpose. Sometimes people say, oh, proposal, that sounds kind of wishy-washy. That's not strong language like a requirement should be. But through the Community Planning Act, if you want a policy to be binding on residents and not just council in a municipal plan, it's a proposal and it uses proposal language just like the proposals in the municipal plan do. So to get into what's actually required, this is for the historic business district. And again, very, very similar to Section 9 of the current zoning bylaw. So entrances facing the street, minimal setbacks, buildings being at parallel or right angles to streets and public spaces, the building size fitting into context with massing and scale, height, those things, having a large degree of transparency at ground level, being able to see into businesses is one of the things that contributes to a vibrant streetscape. So that's very important. Incorporating rooftop mechanical systems into the design or at least screening them. And exterior materials being traditional like cedar, shakes, wooden clapboard. There was a question, are cedar shakes the same thing as cedar shingles? Yes, they're the same thing. It's just another word. Brick, wood, but building technology has come a long way since a lot of the buildings were constructed in St. Andrews. A lot of those were made out of old ship materials from shipbuilding, the shipbuilding industry that existed in town. Now you have much better, more weatherproof, more fireproof, and more better at keeping heat in, those kinds of things. And those new technologies should certainly be incorporated into new buildings and renovations. But as well with that kind of new technology in terms of function, the form has also gotten a lot closer to looking like traditional materials. So if you compare something like a wood fiber cement board to something like vinyl siding, the wood fiber cement board not only is fireproof and weatherproof in a way that vinyl isn't, it also looks a lot more like traditional clapboard. So while there are requirements for materials, there is flexibility in what can be used. Height of awnings for accessibility, making sure that objects in the public realm are not blocking the sidewalk. So now for the town plat and environs, entrances facing the street, buildings at parallel or right angles to streets or public spaces, and building size fitting into context. So very minimal requirements. There's still lots of best practices. And I believe there was a question about doors and the materials of doors. And while they would be encouraged to use a wooden door or something that is kind of mimicking wood, that would not be a requirement for the town plat. It hasn't been through Section 9, and so it's felt there's no reason to have additional requirements, but if people are encouraged to see the value in it, then over time, hopefully the bar for design in St. Andrews, which is already quite high, but hopefully it can go even further than that. So I'll end the presentation now, and I'm very happy to take any questions from anybody at this time.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. Just to remind everyone that this is a hearing of objections, and the Council of the Town of St. Andrews is holding a public meeting tonight to hear objections to the proposed secondary municipal plan bylaw MP 20-02 in accordance with Section 111 of the Community Planning Act. And we will now, Mr. Knopper, we can open that to questions, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will note, Council, we did receive one letter of objection to the secondary municipal plan that was forwarded to you. You've already received a copy. So I will go to those on Zoom to start. I will go to Mr. Vic Miller. Vic, do you have any questions or on the secondary municipal plan to Council or to Alexander Gopin, the planner?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. I will now go to Lindy Townsend. Lindy, you have the floor to the planners and council if you wish to speak to the secondary municipal plan.
Okay, hi. I just wanted to ask a couple questions. Is this just on what Xander presented? And that the objections are simply what he presented, or does it involve the rest of the municipal plan?
Through you, Your Worship, we're only speaking to the secondary municipal plan, the whole secondary municipal plan document tonight, not the other documents, not the municipal plan or the zoning bylaw. This is specifically for the secondary municipal plan tonight.
And does that include those generalized land use maps? No. Okay. Thank you, Xander. So, and then the 6:30 meeting is for what?
Through you, Your Worship, we have a 7 o'clock meeting that's going over the preliminary draft budget and some other aspects that council needs to review. To my knowledge, there's no other public hearings this evening.
Okay, so that 6:30 was somebody that was
that. If I may, that's a meeting not for St. Andrews. That's a meeting for Bayside.
Okay.
There's a development there that.
Okay, well,
I know some St. Andrews residents are probably interested in.
Okay, thank you. I have no further comments.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Townsend.
Thank you.
So, yeah, through you, Your Worship, I'm just going to go to Facebook to see if we have received any comments or questions at this point. I'm just reloading my system. Give me 1 second. Go. Sorry, Council. We have received no other comment or question on Facebook at this point.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Knopper. I guess really we can adjourn then if there isn't any other comments from council. We'll call for a motion.
Through you, Your Worship, Councillor Grew has a question or comment.
Councillor Grew, sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a housekeeping note for Mr. Gopin. Para 2.1.3, You refer, in the very last part of the paragraph, you're referring to a design guidelines, I think just for consistency, if it was just changed to design manual. The other comment I have is just a question is, I noticed when we're looking at the town plat and environs, there seems to be the area around towards Indian Point, where if we're talking about people doing the drive or around the loop, certainly that area is probably going to be one of the first places they're going to go. And yet that's outside of any of the guidelines that we're talking about, or the town plat and environs. So that might be something to consider as we move forward, is extending that town plat and environs to include those areas around on Water Street and on Prince of Wales that have a significant visual impact.
Thank you, Councillor Brew.
I think we would need consensus on that. My only fear is this is a public hearing of objections, and to add them in after the hearing of objections, I don't think that would be fair to any of those landowners.
Yeah, I'm just suggesting that moving forward, because if we do it later, we're going to have another hearing of objections.
I think even if we add it in now, we should have another hearing of objections, because they didn't have an opportunity to speak to their property.
Yeah, it's just a point I've noticed is that it doesn't seem like it's not consistent if we're going to be expanding the town plat because of visual impact. I think we should do it for the whole area that's visually impacted. That's all. Anyway, it's just a comment. Thank you.
Your Worship, I think that's a significant change.
Yeah, I think it is too.
If I may, I can respond to that briefly.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, it would be a significant change. It would be substantial. It would require another public hearing. I guess there's two reasons why there are the areas around included. Yes, they're part of that loop. They do have a visual impact. The other reason is in the zoning bylaw now, parts of those properties are included. And if you look at the language around it, it says these bounded by these streets and including the properties across them. But when it was mapped, it didn't include the whole properties. It only included, I'm not like 10 meters, 20 meters into them. And I don't know why it was mapped that way back in, I guess it would have been 2010. So part of it is just kind of updating that and saying like, yes, the whole properties across the street from the historic town plat should be included. They do have more visual impact. I'm not saying there wouldn't possibly be reasons to include parts of Indian Point as well, but that would be a significant departure from what has been regulated in the past. And even though this does extend into the properties further than it did before, those properties across the street were included, at least parts of them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think I'll look for a motion to adjourn, please. And thank you all.
Quick question, Alexander, since we've got to wait half an hour, how would one get on to the Bayside? I've got 30 minutes here at the office. I might as well have some background. Is it accessible to the general public?
So you have to pre-register, and I don't know if it's too late, but if you go to our website, snbsc.ca, and then go to the planning section, there should be a link, register for public hearing Bayside at 6:30 or something like that. So you can see if you can still register.
Okay.
Mr. Knopper, we're not yet adjourned, are we? Hello?
No, we haven't adjourned yet, Your Worship.
We're not adjourned yet, folks. I looked for a motion to adjourn and I didn't get one, but we're still all live to everybody. So just be aware of that. Can I have a seconder to adjourn, please?
Second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of adjourning? say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned. And Mr. Knobber, can you go and disconnect us now, please, from